Can you read this letter? It's very important. The little girl's final wish shattered the CEO's heart. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The morning light poured through the tall windows of Meridian Cafe like liquid gold, catching dust particles that danced lazily in the air. It was the kind of light that made everything look a little softer, a little more forgiving. The cafe itself sat on a quiet corner of downtown Portland, tucked between a bookstore that smelled like old paper and a flower shop that always had tulips in the window. Inside, the scent of fresh ground coffee beans mixed with cinnamon and warm bread, and the low hum of a jazz playlist floated from speakers hidden somewhere in the exposed brick walls. It was 7:02 on a Wednesday morning, and Ethan Blackwood was exactly where he always was at this time. Corner booth, back to the wall, black coffee in a white ceramic mug, and the Wall Street Journal folded neatly beside his laptop. He had been coming here for 6 years, same table, same order, same 2-hour window, before the rest of his day swallowed him whole. CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, worth more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes, engaged to a woman who looked perfect in photographs and felt like ice in person. His life was a machine, and this cafe was the only part of it that still felt human. The barista, Nina, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, already knew what he wanted before he walked through the door. She never asked questions, never tried to make small talk, just set the coffee down with a quiet smile and let him be. That was the deal. That was why he kept coming back. But this morning, something was different. The door chimed softly and Ethan glanced up out of habit. A little girl stepped inside, maybe 5 years old, wearing a pink winter coat with toggles that did not quite match and white sneakers that lit up with each step. Her dark brown hair was pulled into 2 uneven pigtails, and she clutched a wrinkled envelope against her chest like it was the most important thing in the world. She looked around the cafe slowly, her big hazel eyes scanning every face, every table, until they landed on him. Then, without hesitation, she walked straight toward his booth. Nina stepped out from behind the counter, concern flickering across her face. "Sweetheart, are you lost? Do you need help finding your mom?" The little girl shook her head but did not stop walking. She stopped right in front of Ethan's table and looked up at him with an intensity that made him set down his mug. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice small but steady. "Can you read this letter? It's very important." Ethan blinked, caught completely off guard. He glanced at Nina, who looked just as confused as he felt, then back at the girl. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his tone firm but not unkind. The girl's lip trembled just slightly. "Mommy's in the hospital. She told me to bring this to you. She said if you read it, maybe something good will happen before she goes to heaven." The cafe went silent. Even the jazz seemed to fade into the background. Ethan stared at her, his chest tightening in a way he was not prepared for. "Before she goes to heaven?" The little girl nodded, her eyes filling with tears. She was clearly trying very hard not to let fall. "She's really sick. The doctors said her heart is too tired." Ethan did not move. He could not. This child, this stranger, had just walked into his carefully controlled world and cracked it wide open with a single sentence. Slowly, almost against his better judgment, he reached out and took the envelope from her small hands. The paper was soft and worn, like it had been folded and unfolded a dozen times. His name was written across the front in handwriting he recognized instantly. Handwriting that made his stomach drop and his pulse spike all at once. Claire Dawson. He tore it open, hands shaking slightly, and pulled out 2 handwritten pages. The ink was blue, some words smudged as if tears had fallen while she wrote. The first line hit him like a freight train. "If you're reading this, I'm dying." He kept reading, barely breathing. "I tried to keep this secret because I thought it was kinder that way. But I realize now truth matters more than comfort. I cannot leave this world without telling you the truth. Ethan, Sophie is your daughter." His vision blurred. The words swam on the page. "She has your eyes. She loves hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. And sometimes when she laughs, I hear you. I never stopped loving you, but I had to choose the quieter pain of silence rather than add more chaos to your world. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't let her be alone. Signed, Claire." Ethan looked up slowly, The little girl, Sophie, was standing perfectly still, watching him with those wide, serious eyes. She whispered, do you know my mommy? His throat was so tight he could barely speak. I used to, he said, his voice breaking. A long time ago. Sophie's face brightened just a little, hope flickering like a candle in the dark. Then, can you help her? Ethan folded the letter carefully, his hands still trembling, and looked at this child, his child, standing in front of him like a ghost from a life he thought he had buried. Where is she now? He asked. 6 years ago, this exact table had been theirs. Ethan could still remember the way Claire used to sit across from him every Sunday morning, her blonde hair catching the light through these same windows, her laugh spilling out over terrible jokes he told just to hear that sound. She used to steal sips of his coffee even though she always ordered tea, and she would sketch on napkins while he talked about business plans he was not sure would ever work. Back then, he was nobody, just a guy with big dreams and a beat-up laptop. And she had believed in him anyway, loved him anyway, stayed anyway, until the day she did not. Until Rebecca, his assistant at the time, showed him a photo of Claire with another man, arms around him, smiling like Ethan had never existed. He never asked for an explanation. He just walked away and built walls so high nothing could ever hurt him again. But now, sitting across from the daughter he never knew he had, those walls were crumbling fast. Sophie sat beside him in the booth, swinging her light-up sneakers back and forth, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. Nina had brought her a hot chocolate without being asked, extra marshmallows piled high, and Sophie sipped it carefully, her eyes never leaving Ethan's face. Are you really going to help my mommy? She asked quietly. Ethan nodded, still trying to process everything, still trying to breathe through the weight pressing down on his chest. I'm going to try, sweetheart. I promise. Sophie smiled just a little, and it was like looking in a mirror he had never known existed. That smile, lopsided and genuine, was his. The shape of her eyes, the way her brow furrowed when she was thinking. All of it was him staring back. Then, without warning, Sophie's smile faded. Her hand went to her chest, and her breathing changed. Quick, shallow, wrong. She set down the mug with a shaky hand and looked up at him, panic flooding her face. I can't, she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan's entire body went cold. Sophie? Her lips were turning pale. She reached for her coat pocket, fumbling, but came up empty, no inhaler. Her breath came in short, desperate wheezes, her small chest heaving like she was trying to pull air through a straw. Oh my God, Ethan breathed, his CEO composure shattering in an instant. Nina! He shot up from the booth and scooped Sophie into his arms. She was so light, so fragile, and she clung to him with trembling fingers. Nina was already on the phone, voice sharp and clear, as she spoke to the 911 operator. Ethan sat back down, cradling Sophie against his chest, his hand on her back. Hey, look at me, he said, his voice shaking but firm. Breathe with me, okay? In and out. You're okay. You're gonna be okay. But she was not okay. Her wheezing got worse, her body going limp in his arms. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she fought for every breath. Ethan had never felt so helpless in his entire life. He had closed million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, fired executives without flinching, but watching this little girl struggle to breathe, tore him apart. The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes, but it felt like hours. Paramedics rushed in, took her from his arms, laid her on a stretcher, oxygen mask over her tiny face. Ethan followed them out, refusing to let her out of his sight. I'm coming with her, he said, and no one argued. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and beeping monitors. Ethan sat beside the stretcher, holding Sophie's hand, whispering things he was not even sure made sense. You're so brave. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. At the hospital, they rushed her into the ER, and a nurse gently but firmly pushed him back. Sir, please wait here. We'll update you as soon as we can. Ethan stood frozen in the hallway, hands still shaking, heart pounding so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. Then he heard it, a voice from down the hall, frantic and breathless. Sophie? Where's Sophie? Is she okay? He turned slowly, and there she was, Claire. She was in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse who was clearly struggling to keep up. An oxygen tube ran beneath her nose, her face pale and drawn, but her eyes, those blue eyes he had loved so fiercely, were exactly the same. She looked up and their gazes locked across the sterile white hallway. Time stopped. The noise, the chaos, the fear, all of it fell away. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. He could not speak, could not move. The woman he had loved, the woman he thought had betrayed him, the woman who had just told him he was a father, was sitting 20 feet away, dying, and all he could do was stare. "Ma'am, you should not have left your room," the nurse said gently, but Claire ignored her. "Did she give you the letter?" Claire asked, tears already streaming down her face. Ethan nodded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know how else to." A doctor stepped between them. "You can both see her now. She's asking for you. Both of you." They moved toward the room together, Claire's wheelchair rolling beside Ethan's long strides. Inside, Sophie lay in a hospital bed, oxygen mask still on, but her eyes were open. When she saw them, she reached out both hands. "Mommy? Daddy?" And just like that, the three of them were connected, broken and scared and holding on for dear life. The DNA test results came back on a Thursday afternoon, delivered in a plain manila envelope that sat on Ethan's desk for nearly an hour before he had the guts to open it. He stood at his office window, 42 floors above the city, staring at the paper in his hands like it might catch fire. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. He read it 3 times, then a 4th, and each time the words hit harder. Sophie was his. There was no question, no doubt, no escape from the truth that had been staring him in the face since the moment she walked into that cafe. He was a father, and he had missed 5 years of her life because of a lie he never bothered to question. That same afternoon, he started showing up at the hospital every single day, not just to see Claire, though those visits gutted him every time, but to spend time with Sophie, the little girl who had somehow become the center of his entire universe in less than a week. He would pick her up from the hospital's family lounge and take her to Meridian Cafe, their cafe now, and they would sit at the same corner booth where her parents had once fallen in love. Sophie would order hot chocolate, always with extra marshmallows, and Ethan would teach her how to stir it just right so the chocolate did not settle at the bottom. Nina, the barista who had seen it all unfold, started keeping crayons and coloring books behind the counter just for her, and Sophie would draw for hours, her tongue poking out in concentration, her little legs swinging under the table. One afternoon, she slid a drawing across to him. It was 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a building with a giant coffee cup on top. "That's you, that's me, and that's Mommy," she explained, pointing at each one. "And that's our family spot." Ethan stared at the picture, throat tight, and carefully folded it into his jacket pocket like it was made of glass. Meanwhile, Claire's condition was getting worse. Ethan had demanded a full consultation with her medical team, and what they told him made his blood run cold. She had end-stage congestive heart failure and early-stage breast cancer. The cancer treatments would destroy her already failing heart. The heart was too weak to survive the cancer. It was a vicious, impossible cycle, and the doctors gave her 3 to 6 months without a miracle. "What about a transplant?" Ethan had asked, his voice hard and desperate. The lead cardiologist sighed. "She's on the list, but the wait time is years, not months. And even if we found a donor tomorrow, her body is so weak right now, she might not survive the surgery." Ethan sat in that sterile conference room, hands clenched into fists, and for the first time in his life, all the money and power he had meant absolutely nothing. But he was not the only one paying attention. Rebecca Stone, his fiancée, had noticed his disappearances. The canceled dinners, the ignored calls, the way he looked right through her like she was not even there anymore. So she followed him one evening all the way to the hospital and watched through a window as Ethan sat beside Claire's bed, holding her hand, while Sophie colored quietly in the corner. Rebecca's perfectly controlled expression cracked, just for a moment, before the rage set in. She cornered him in the parking lot that night, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. "So this is where you've been," she said, voice dripping with venom. Playing house with some dying woman and a kid who's probably not even yours? Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression colder than she had ever seen it. Sophie is my daughter, he said flatly. The paternity test came back 2 days ago. 99.9%. Rebecca's face went white, but she recovered quickly, letting out a bitter laugh. You don't actually believe this is real, do you? She disappears for 6 years and suddenly shows up dying with a convenient kid in tow? This is a con, Ethan. Ethan stepped closer, his voice deadly calm. Her name is Sophie, and she's not a con. She's my child. Rebecca's mask slipped further. You're going to throw away everything we built for some sob story? For her? Ethan stared at her, really looked at her, and realized he had never actually loved this woman. She was a strategy, a piece of the image he thought he needed. We didn't build anything, Rebecca. I built it. You just smiled for the cameras. Her jaw clenched, desperation creeping into her eyes. She left you, Ethan. She chose someone else. I showed you the picture. You saw it yourself. That's when something clicked in his mind, sharp and sudden like a lock turning. He took a step toward her. The picture? The guy in the photo with Claire. Rebecca stammered. I don't. What does that even? His name was Marcus, Ethan said quietly. Claire's best friend since high school. He was gay, Rebecca, and he died of cancer 2 years ago. The color drained from her face. Ethan's voice did not rise, but it cut like a blade. You lied to me. You manipulated me into walking away from the only woman I ever loved, so you could have a clear shot. Rebecca opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Before Ethan could say another word, his phone rang. The hospital. He answered immediately. Mr. Blackwood, you need to come now. It's Claire. Her heart. We're losing her. He did not wait for Rebecca's response. He just ran. Ethan burst through the hospital doors like a man possessed, his dress shoes skidding on the polished floor as he sprinted toward the cardiac wing. Alarms were blaring from somewhere down the hall, and nurses were moving fast, too fast, their faces set in that grim expression that meant something had gone terribly wrong. He rounded the corner just in time to see a crash cart being wheeled into Claire's room, and his heart stopped. A nurse tried to block him at the door, but he shoved past her, and what he saw inside nearly brought him to his knees. Claire was flat on the bed, her body jerking with each compression as a doctor pressed down hard on her chest. The heart monitor showed a flat green line, and the sound, that long, unbroken tone, was the worst thing Ethan had ever heard in his life. Clear, the doctor shouted, and Claire's body arched off the bed as the defibrillator sent a shock through her chest. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, his lungs refusing to work, his mind screaming at him to do something. Anything. But there was nothing he could do. Then he heard a small, broken voice behind him. Daddy! He turned. Sophie stood in the hallway, her face streaked with tears, her hands covering her mouth. A volunteer was trying to hold her back, but she had seen everything. Don't let her go to heaven yet, Sophie sobbed. Please, Daddy, don't let her go. Ethan dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair as she clung to him. Behind them, the doctor called for another round. The paddles charged, clear, and then a beep, faint, but there. Then another, and another. The flatline broke into a rhythm, weak but steady, and the room exhaled as one. We got her back, the doctor said, his voice tight with relief. Ethan's legs nearly gave out. Sophie looked up at him, eyes wide and hopeful. Is Mommy okay? She's okay, sweetheart, he whispered, though his voice was shaking so hard he barely got the words out. She's okay. That night, after Sophie had finally cried herself to sleep in his arms, Ethan sat alone in the waiting room and made a decision. He pulled out his phone and started making calls, first to his private physician, then to the director of oncology at Johns Hopkins, then to every cardiovascular specialist on the East Coast. By dawn, he had found it, an experimental treatment being offered at only 3 hospitals in the country. It used targeted gene therapy to shrink the tumor while simultaneously strengthening the heart muscle, preparing patients for transplant. The catch was the waiting list. 18 months minimum. Ethan did not hesitate. He called the hospital administrator directly. I will fund a new research wing. I will endow the program. I will do whatever it takes, but Claire Dawson gets into that trial this week. 3 days later, Claire was transferred to the Cardiac Institute in Seattle, into a private suite overlooking the water. Ethan moved into a hotel across the street and showed up every single morning with coffee and Sophie. But he did not stop there. One afternoon, about a month into Claire's treatment, he walked into her room carrying a rolled-up set of blueprints. She looked up from her book, eyebrows raised. What's this? He spread the plans across her bed. It was the building next to Meridian Cafe, the one that had been sitting empty for years. Ethan had bought it. This is going to be the Meridian Community Health Center, he said quietly. Free cardiac screenings, cancer support groups, resources for single parents, all of it. Claire's hands flew to her mouth, tears already spilling over. Ethan, this is what your letter taught me, he interrupted gently. That the most important thing is not the next deal, it's the next heartbeat. She reached for his hand and held it tight, unable to speak. Sophie, coloring in the corner, looked up and grinned. Daddy's a superhero now, Mommy, just like I said. 3 months later, Claire had stabilized enough to be placed on the transplant list. Her birthday was coming up, her 34th, and Ethan had planned a small celebration at the cafe with Sophie and a few close friends. Then, 2 days before the party, his phone rang. Mr. Blackwood, the transplant coordinator, said, her voice calm but urgent. We have a match. A heart just became available. Surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Ethan's breath caught. He looked across the room at Claire, who was watching him with wide, knowing eyes. We found one, he said, his voice breaking. She covered her face with both hands and sobbed. Sophie climbed onto the bed and wrapped her arms around her mother. You have to be okay, Mommy. You have to. That night, Ethan sat in a chair beside Claire's bed, holding her hand while she slept. The pre-op team would arrive at dawn. 14 hours of surgery, a coin flip between life and death. He leaned close and whispered into the dark. Come back to me, Claire. We've got a lifetime to make up for. 14 hours. That was how long the surgery was supposed to take, and every single minute of it felt like drowning. Ethan sat in the surgical waiting room with Sophie curled up in his lap, her head resting against his chest, her small fingers clutching his shirt like a lifeline. Nina had shown up around hour 3 with the entire cafe staff, arms full of coffee and sandwiches no one touched. By hour 8, Sophie had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from crying. By hour 12, the surgeon came out with a grim expression and said there had been complications, and Ethan thought his heart might actually stop. But then, at hour 14, the doors opened again. The surgeon pulled down her mask, and she was smiling. She made it, the surgeon said, her voice thick with relief. The heart is strong. She's going to make it. Ethan did not remember standing up. He did not remember the tears that poured down his face or the way his knees buckled. He just remembered Sophie waking up in his arms and asking, Is Mommy okay? And him nodding over and over, unable to speak. 2 weeks later, Claire was sitting up in bed, eating real food, laughing at something Sophie had drawn, and Ethan could not stop staring at her like she might disappear if he looked away. One morning, she caught him watching and smiled. Why are you looking at me like that? Because I almost lost you, he said quietly, and I can't stop thinking about all the time we wasted. She reached for his hand. We didn't waste it, Ethan. We just took the long way home. 6 months after that, Claire was discharged, healthy and strong, and glowing in a way that made Ethan's chest ache every time he looked at her. Sophie's 6th birthday was coming up, and he had been planning it for weeks. The party was at Meridian Cafe, of course, decorated with balloons and streamers, and a cake shaped like a coffee cup that made Sophie shriek with laughter. But halfway through the party, Ethan took Claire's hand and led her away from the crowd, back to their corner booth. She looked around, confused at first, and then she saw it. The booth had been restored exactly the way it looked 6 years ago. The same scratched wooden table, the same mismatched chairs, and on the wall behind it, framed photographs of the two of them from back then, laughing over coffee, stealing kisses, completely and hopelessly in love. Oh my God, Claire whispered, her hand over her mouth. Ethan knelt down in front of her, right there in the middle of the cafe, and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. 6 years ago, I was too scared to fight for you, he said, his voice steady but his hands shaking. I won't make that mistake again. Claire Dawson, will you marry me? Here, where it all began. She did not even let him finish. Yes, she laughed through her tears. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. The entire cafe erupted in applause, and Sophie came running over, throwing her arms around both of them. Does this mean we're a real family now? Ethan lifted her up and kissed her forehead. We always were, sweetheart. 1 year later, they got married in that same cafe, surrounded by everyone who mattered. Claire walked down the aisle in a simple white dress, healthy and radiant and alive, and Ethan cried the second he saw her. Sophie was the flower girl, of course, scattering petals with the most serious expression anyone had ever seen. And when they cut the ribbon at the grand opening of the Meridian Community Health Center a few months after that, it was the three of them standing together, hands intertwined. The plaque on the wall read, "Built on the power of a letter, the courage of a little girl, and the second chance that changed everything." Sophie, now 7, volunteered at the center every weekend, handing out coloring books to kids in the waiting room and telling them, "My mommy was really sick once, but my daddy saved her, and now they save other people too." That night, Sophie sat at her bedroom window with her journal open, writing by the glow of her nightlight. "Dear anyone who reads this someday," she wrote in wobbly letters, "my mommy says love is the most important letter anyone can send. She sent one to my daddy when she thought she was going to heaven, but she didn't go because he read it and he fought for her. Now we have a cafe and a place where people can get help when they're scared, and it all started because of one letter. Mommy says everyone has a letter inside them. You just have to be brave enough to send it." She closed the journal and looked out at the stars. From the doorway, Ethan and Claire stood watching, arms wrapped around each other. And somewhere on the wall of Meridian Cafe, under soft yellow light, the original letter sat framed in glass. "Can you read this letter? It's very important." It had been, more than anyone could have ever known. If this story reminded you that love is worth fighting for, that second chances are real, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, please like this video and share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe to Shepaw Tales for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us we're never too broken to come home. Thank you for listening.